So a very warm welcome to this next edition of this series of online events that we're offering you. These are opportunity to interact with the speakers who will be enriching our exploration of governance, of rethinking governance, and how a new way of seeing governance can actually help us in organizations to create better companies, better structures, to really be more aligned with the kind of new world order we want to shape. So we're blessed today with three great speakers. They're going to run a session on touching on the aspect of governance related to gender equality. Where does gender equality fit into it? Gender equality is one of the key core values of ebbf. This is very important for us to actually also make sure we cover this element of governance in our conference. So you now have the opportunity to interact with these three speakers. We have Wendy Moman, Maya Groff, and Ralph Blundell, who will be shortly starting a short presentation. Then we can start into the usual dialogue, question and answer, where you can really tap into their thinking, offer your own thoughts, and go deeper. So without further ado, I leave it to the team of speakers, the trio of speakers with almost perfect gender equality, Maya, Ralph, and Wendy.
Hi, everybody. So it's Wendy. I'm going to be kicking off today's discussion. And the first question I would be looking at is, why are we asking this question? Why are we even having to do this? And I think that's really what we're trying to explore. We're trying to set this whole discussion in the context of ebbf's mission and its values. Daniel went briefly over that, but let me just read that mission to you. That ebbf is a Baha'i-inspired global learning community that accompanies mindful individuals and groups through daily work and discourse to transform business and the economy, thereby contributing to a prosperous, just, and sustainable civilization. So that's the context in which we are going to be discussing today, and things I'm interested in personally. And also the values of ebbf, that we have 7 core values. Daniel mentioned one, gender equality, but I would say that all of our values bear on this, particularly the ones on justice, the fact that we are created noble beings, the concept of sustainability, and the concept of service. These are the ones that are particularly, it seems to me, bear on the issues that we're talking about today. I also want to sort of frame things by thinking about the nature of what a learning community is. And I think looking at that issue, we're trying to work with like-minded people who are already convinced that this is a good direction of travel, to address the kind of pressing challenges that we are facing today in all aspects of our society. And we need to try to figure out what are the questions that we need to ask to address this. It's not just saying, here's a solution, add women, that'll solve all the problems. It clearly isn't that. So we need to actually decide what those important questions are and how we can begin to answer them, and the kinds of people that we need to be working with to answer those questions. Right now, for example, where are we in this discourse? Where are we already? And what are the assumptions that are already being made about business and business success that need to be looked at and restructured, reconsidered, reevaluated in order for us to move towards a position where we can contribute to a prosperous, just, and sustainable civilization by transforming business and economies.
Firstly, this question, which is guiding the preparation of our keynote, what happens when you bring feminine leadership into a governance structure? And I like that terminology, the feminine leadership, which implies that also everyone can also embody sort of more classically feminine characteristics in leadership positions. But in terms of what we know of what happens when we bring more women or more feminine qualities into leadership structure, we don't know the whole picture picture. We don't know yet what all of the benefits will be, because we're only, as Wendy was saying, sort of partway through this project of gender equality and human nobility and justice for all human beings in our businesses, in society. But we do have some research thus far. For example, Catalyst is the organization that has done the business research on high-performing companies, and there is a correlation that they've found between more gender parity on boards and higher classical economic performance, for example. So just on that metric, there should be benefits. Also, there's quite a lot of anecdotal and also sort of correlating evidence that women in general in the corporate setting are more frequently whistleblowers, so are more alert to corruption issues, ethical issues, and women disproportionately are in CSR divisions, for example, of companies. Also, there's been some really nice articles on the different leadership characteristics that women can typically embody in leadership positions, such as more of a listening, cooperative, less hierarchical, etc. type of approach. And some analysts will say, well, this only happens also once you have reach a critical mass of women on a given governance structure, a board or an executive committee, etc. If you only have one or two women or a significant minority of women, the same old hierarchical structure, if that's what it is, will dominate. And women, for example, will just adapt to that hierarchical and sort of more dominance-based leadership or a model. So I think in terms of society, our shared prosperity, all the benefits, the true dividends of more gender balance are yet to come. We're yet to see them, but we're in a process. And just notes from the Baha'i writings in terms of what's guiding some of us also in this area, we're told that civilization will not really progress to its full extent unless men and women are truly equal, unless there's true solidarity and equality, that women are just as strong in all the societal functions, including in business, as men. We know that. So it has a very strong linkage to social progress, civilizational progress. Also, we know from the Baha'i writings that men will not reach their full potential, their full human development and capacities until there is equality with women. So that's sort of an incredible insight and a huge motivator for men to care about this issue if civilization wasn't enough. It's also about men's capacities and development. And then also, as I work in the international law sphere, there's this linkage in the Baha'i writings with global peace, that peace, like a sustainable peace on the planet, will not be achieved until women get more involved in international arbitration and leadership in what we call the political sphere. So those are all huge, compelling reasons to really think deeply about this topic, I think. And also in particular with all the global crises we're facing. And one really amazing example and role model I've seen recently in terms of sort of global leadership for, the crises we're facing is the previous executive secretary of the UNFCCC, which oversaw the negotiation of the Paris Climate Accord, Cristiana Figueres. Her type of leadership embodies those sorts of feminine qualities, in my view, from hearing her speak and talk. And this is, again, someone who's giving her talent in partnership with others, with men and women, to try to tackle, one of our crucial global crises. What other people think, but also where are we at this point? Like, what are you seeing in your workplace environments, in your regions, in your countries, in your institutions that you're engaging with in terms of the gender parity? Are you seeing good equality or partnership of men and women in leadership and governance or not? Also, are you seeing these feminine qualities at all embodied in leadership? or are you not seeing it, or is it just recreating sort of an old model of leadership?
I'm the lucky guy whose workplace is ebbf, so it's a very special workplace.
Yeah.
And there's two things, amongst many, two things that I notice about the women leadership behavior. One is good and one is bad. The good one is in the last, one of the last international events, Tahiri Misho from South Africa presented, and really circle questions, dialogue. She was not keynoting; she was entering a dialogue, so it was a very different thing from what we originally expected. So that's something quite peculiar. In a previous event that we did in Italy, in Acuto, with Miri Sorab, she was working at Microsoft at the time. She had this beautiful podium, beautiful speaker, all the slides ready, and she stops for a moment. She gets off the podium, steps down, puts a chair next to everybody else, creates a circle, and again has a conversation. So this is the kind of thing that struck me about the feminine. We're generalizing, but one of the feminine traits. They do not need to be on the pedestal, monologuing and telling everybody else what the situation should be like, and instead step down in a sense, be part of the group, and open dialogues that really enrich everybody in the room. So that's an interesting and positive thing. On the negative side at ebbf is that we are really struggling to get female speakers. So we send a call for speakers, and all the men put their hands up. I'm a great speaker. I'll speak. And no women step up and actually say, I'm actually a really good speaker. And this is, I'm not sure why, probably because women need to feel truly ticking all the boxes and therefore say, okay, I apply because I'm just really fantastic. Whilst men need to tick one of 10 boxes and then they think they're great, generalizing. So I'm not sure about this case. So the good thing is the female leadership stepping down and opening the dialogue. The not so good is the women still not coming forward, maybe because the structure is not right for them to come forward, maybe because something has not improved in that mentality. So I'm really curious to hear your thoughts about why, the question on the question, why may those two things have happened?
So let me jump in there as somebody who's straightforward. I guess this is one of the questions that we can be asking. First of all, the whole question of the speaker, is that really a valuable contribution to what we're trying to achieve? And we just use this as an example of women in any organizational structure. Do we need to have people who are articulate in the ways that men are articulate? Do we need to have them positioning things in the ways that are traditionally considered to be appropriate? How do we communicate knowledge better than the way that men have done it by giving a talk without interruption and saying, I have all the answers, here I am. So these are some of the fundamental questions. I mean, there's many more that come and say, well, we have created in our businesses at ebbf and in other spaces a particular kind of dynamic, and it works like this. And too bad women just aren't fitting into that structure. Something wrong with women about that. Whereas in fact, you might say, well, actually the structure itself may not be the best environment for learning. Maybe just stepping down and having conversations like this is a better place for learning. Maybe simply asking questions which we ponder on and don't have an immediate answer for is a better way to progress. So there's also something about questioning the assumptions of what is positive and successful. And if we're doing it at ebbf, which we are, then, should we not be also considering how these same kinds of structures, whether they're hierarchical or, I have all the answers, should we not be looking and saying, well, actually, do any systems, do any organizations, do any institutions, do any businesses really, should they be progressing in the way they are, or should they also be looking to see if they are actually answering what the more profound question is? And I can't tell you what that question might be, but it might be, how do we serve our community better? How do we involve more people in the service? How are we structured that is not enabling a wider service to be rendered? are we making the best contribution we could make towards our community development and so forth, as well as being profitable and as well as, surviving and so on. So I'm not sure that the questions, we even have answers to those questions, but I do question the assumptions that says this is the model and women have to step up.
I would like to add something to the conversation. So, as some of you know, I'm based in Bucharest, in Romania, and I've ran an NGO that is a global young professionals NGO. So before I worked in the corporate field, and now I'm an entrepreneur. So these are briefly the environments where I moved more. And in Romania, well, there's a pretty big percentage of ladies who are in leadership positions. I was talking to one of them actually, who had a senior role also in the public sector, in the government. Then before that, actually, she was at a very senior level in a huge corporation. So she knew quite well many ladies who were in leadership positions. And what she was upset about was the fact that, okay, in Romania there are many leadership roles for women, but at the mid-level or senior level, but not necessarily so much in top management. But actually, even myself, I was at a certain point very much connected to clean, nice, and really powerful business community in Romania, Romanian business leaders. And yes, I think I can say that. And at the same time, for startups, now I have a startup for 3 years, and I was invited to a semi-final of entrepreneurship, feminine entrepreneurship. The organizers have an issue of identifying qualified, entrepreneurs, ladies entrepreneurs, who are founders and who own at least 50% of the business. However, there are many women in leadership roles, as I said, at mid and senior management in corporations. They predominate in the NGO area. So there are many ladies who run foundations and NGOs, and they do it quite successfully. But what they want, what the women want, and how do they want to position themselves as leaders? But in Romania, what I feel, however, it's a positive environment, however, for women to develop in leadership roles. This is how I feel. I mean, when I was in the corporate world, I just made this choice at a certain point that I want to do something more meaningful, and I prefer to do it on my own. This was my choice at that time. But I was evolving very quickly on meritocracy, let's say, and I didn't feel like I would be stopped. But what I feel in Romania is that if you really want to, I don't know, go and be there on top, either that is in corporate or in NGO or in entrepreneurship, there is an environment that is rather positive.
So my question to the experts now, or the speakers now, would be, what are the conditions? Why is Romania better for women? So if we're looking at governance systems, what are some of the key conditions that allow a more intelligent, wise, balanced governance?
A network for women in international law event convened here in The Hague. There was a big discussion about women in the legal profession, and the legal profession, there's still a long way to go. For example, in the UK has just gotten its second woman on the Supreme Court, for example. So maybe the legal profession is way behind the corporate sphere in many countries. But at this meeting, the one woman who spoke up and said, I have never been oppressed and I have had a free run in my career, is the Romanian ambassador to the Netherlands. And everybody else was shocked, especially some of the African women were they said, really, is that really the case? So I don't know, there might be something that's being done very, very right in Romania. What Anka was saying about not feeling like there are barriers to you in particular is really extraordinary. Like having that feeling as a woman that, okay, there's not another hurdle. you know, this invisible, indirect or direct hurdle. And that's quite extraordinary. And I think we can learn from that. But I'd like to hear from other people also what they've seen in terms of the gender parity, like in the corporate sphere. Ralph.
Well, just this question of conditions. I mean, it's interesting what Anka was saying. It's really nice that you're here, Anka. Hi.
Hi, Ralph.
When I experienced in Kosovo, which was in a post-conflict reconstruction, was that lots of old norms disappeared. Poof, they were exploded, they went. And so there was a lot of free space for people to do things differently. So I think that might be one of the answers, because I think when a country goes through a radical transformation in its governance and that has an impact on culture, it creates space. The other thing that jumps to mind, going back to your original question about why don't the women step forward, Daniel, is I think where our standards are pretty low. I mean, our sort of general social standards. If we think about this in terms of human development, at the kind of civic leadership level, the most prized activity is to be diplomatic. And if we think about at the business level, the most prized achievement is to achieve, right? To get things done. ebbf is interested in the unity of the human race, which is a bit of a big step away from getting things done or being diplomatic. These are very low-level skills, and in terms of leadership hierarchies, they're what you would call conventional, all sorts of different models. Whereas the unity of the human race, justice, concepts like that are post-conventional, they're much more complex. So I think in some, and if I think about the city, where I still do bits of stuff, and all the work that's going on now around Me Too, the millions that are being spent in trying to deal with the fallout from the Me Too, what do we call it, phenomenon for the moment. People aren't asking the more complex questions. They're not pushing themselves to say, why is this happening at all? Some of what we need is to break down the old order a bit, and some of what we need is belief that there is a higher set of purposes. And I think that it's when there's a crisis, those things emerge differently, but when it's business as usual, they don't.
So one of the phrases I've used is never let a good crisis go to waste. You know, it's when you shake things up that creates opportunity to do something different. And if part of a crisis has to do with a crisis of leadership or structure, that's a good time people are open to trying something different. If there isn't a crisis, it takes genuine vision for people to consider doing something different. So I guess there's an opportunistic aspect of saying, all right, what do we need to do now to lead to different outcomes?
But it's interesting because both James and Ralph were saying that very clearly. You know, the Me Too issue, for example, is, okay, how do we solve it next? How do we solve it next? So, and even there, what decision can we take next? But actually, I think you mentioned it, Ralph, it's really, what are the key questions you need to ask? Why on earth did this happen? There was an article that I saw, is why is it illegal? Why is it legal for women to be paid less than men? It sounds like it should be legal. And why is it legal? I haven't read the article, but I mean, these are the kind of questions we should be asking before we make the transition, because otherwise we have not really made a transition. We just go from bad to worse, or from bad to whatever else, without a level of awareness, of understanding of the underlying principles that would allow us to avoid the future Me Too's or whatever will be next. So to me, this is fascinating in terms of the time, I guess, the courage, the wisdom, the trusting environment we're in, that why questions can be asked. And that's exactly how Wendy started the whole call.
So, I mean, I guess this is exactly the heart of the issue, in which comes first. How do you create an environment in which it is automatic for people to be paid the same wage for the same effort and job and qualifications and so on. You know, can you solve these problems just by creating a legal or, you know, a framework around that? For example, in Britain, we've had gender equality legislation for pay for over 30 years. I think it's something like that. It's never happened. Basically, women in the UK work for free from the end of November to December. That's the sort of pay gap. It's about 18–20%. More in other areas. You know, there's all these kinds of issues. But I guess more, you know, do you just fix that and say, well, it's illegal not to do that, and then that's, you know, becomes a kind of particular way? I'm particular, I mean, that might be true, but I'm also very interested in how to create a community of people going forward who actually believe that it's important for all things in every aspect, as Maya was saying, to have true equality between women and men, you know, a more just society for all people, despite their background and all the kind of characteristics that people use to divide each other, whether it be race or nationality or language or education or whatever it is, all those kinds of things. You know, how do we create that society? What are the building blocks of that? And can we do that without actually having bigger conversations around who are we? You know, why are we interested in these areas? What are the things that are preventing, you know, are those structures actually right? So I think the conversations that we have are actually extremely useful. And I guess one of the things that ebbf does is it hosts these kinds of discussions. I think that's useful.
Let me ask a provocative question here. Why limit women to equality with men? In the ugly PowerPoint deck that I sent, which was prepared by Tom Peters, on slide 45 out of the 119 that are there, it says, notes that women ages 22 to 30 earn 8% more than their male counterparts. In Atlanta, 21% more, New York City, 17% more, Miami, 14% more, Memphis, 19% more. And so generationally, I think what is happening as a matter of fact is that women are being paid more than their male counterparts. So equality in those cases would limit them rather than allow them to grow into whatever they're currently growing into, which certainly begs questions then that says, okay, what's the value being created by young women that's different now? Or is there something happening in the environment? Is there something happening demographically? Is there something happening in the education system that allows them to be compensated at a higher rate than their contemporary men? And what can we learn from that? And it was May 2017, and say, are there places where interesting things are happening, and what can we learn from them? And say, you know, what's going on?
Yeah, and I've seen those statistics also, James, and also my experience, for example, in law school now over 10 years ago, but there were, I think, equal or more women than men in law school. And that translated obviously into more young lawyers. But then in the legal profession, only 30% of partners in US corporate firms are women. But I have also seen those statistics for like urban centers, as you say, and among certain generations. And that to me is worrying also and disturbing. I completely agree with like unleashing the full talent of women and young women and letting them to develop all of their capacities. But then, and this is sort of something that's been flagged in the educational system about, well, is it now failing men somehow, or what is happening with boys and young men? But also, like, how are men actually developing their capacities properly to not just meet the market demands, but also the social demands of a more gender parity world? Like this dynamic, I think it's quite complex. Because women have had to like sort of really fight for their professional lives and their personal lives, or have had to go through a lot of really stressful, adaptive sort of metamorphoses since the women's movement. But have men had those same opportunities to really have the deep introspection and develop and their capacities for being in a more gender parity world, for example? That's something I wonder about, because as Wendy was saying, like these discussions, these sort of conscious discussions aren't happening as much as one would like, and all the complex dimensions that are involved with, because it's really a sociological change. It's a change in our interpersonal relationships, our workplace dynamics. So I don't think it's a simple thing. Maybe this is a stereotype, but some women getting more aggressive in the business sphere, and like kind of then things swing to the other direction. And like, because women are so oppressed in many ways, you know, women want to dominate in a certain sense or approve. And I don't think that's healthy either. I really like the parity or men and women working together.
I would like to also just sort of add that I think it's really good to celebrate when things like that can happen, and when younger people or women in any place can rise, you know, to match or even, you know, exceed the expectations that they might have had otherwise, or that people are welcoming those positions of responsibility and are being remunerated accordingly. I think that those are really great things. I'm not suspicious of the detail on that. I think the disaggregation is extremely important over that data, to look at that and to see where those things actually, you know, what the reasons are for them, and to enhance that. I mean, I think that would be a wonderful piece of work to do. At the same time, the statistics for women being harassed in the workplace sexually is also very high. So we're looking at, you know, when we look at individual things like gender pay gap, you know, women's access to political decision making, all these kinds of different things. When we look across the world, you know, women are still not really in a position of even close to parity. But, you know, if we can learn something from business that would enable us to move forward, I think that would be worthwhile exploring, and to see what the dynamics are there that enable women to achieve in those particular cities, in those particular sectors, and so forth. And to have that conversation. Are they replicable? Are they things that are on the back of other challenges that women have had to face? One of the things that we need to have, it seems to me, is to actually know, what do we mean when we say equality? What are we actually saying? And is it just? Are we looking at equality through the lens of justice? Or are we looking at justice through the lens of equality? You know, these are not isolated ideas, but they are a cluster of ideas which together will enable all of humanity to advance in certain ways.
Because of this fundamental change you want to create, not just a quick fix. I know it's blasé, but Me Too really affected me because I really thought it was a limited thing. And then when I saw so many of my female friends saying Me Too and detailing what actually happened to them during the course, I was blown away by the extent of this injustice in pretty stark levels sometimes, and superficial. So that firstly created a real new awareness in me of this, how widespread. And why? Because it's not something, an article I read in the paper, on the Guardian, New York Times, whatever. It's my friends. My friends had suffered exactly that. So there's a very different, exactly. So that's a really very different, very tangible. It really, boom, hit me. So I think living that situation, creating the conditions whereby different, in this case, gender or culture or whatever, live in another role for a while, that really brings home what it actually means, better than a word, an article, a statistic, anything else. So I think creating the experiences that would allow the other side to see what it actually feels like, that is a really good way to hopefully bring a new awareness. And the other item that I would think would be interesting is to say, how much better life, results, business, everything else would be with a more equal board. Because I'm not sure exactly why it's so, I guess men or the structures make it so hard for women to raise to where they should be, to make everything more successful. There's a kind of a lid or something there that's preventing that. And just allowing that lid globally to be lifted, understanding that it's actually better for everybody when that happens. So there's a real advantage. So, men that want the solution, hey, this is a really good solution. By lifting this, actually, things will improve.
I think the storytelling thing is really important, because it makes it very personal and brings it to awareness. However, I only think it's a fractional answer, because all the men who do this already know that they do it, and all their colleagues know they're doing it too. And because men, by and large, have shaped our institutions, large parts of this, like institutional racism, right, have become deeply embedded. So it's very difficult. We can tell the stories, that's good, right? We have to tell the stories, but it's very difficult because we have to take some risks. We need to take risks. We need to have the conversation. We need to accept that things will go wrong. And this comes way back in a circle to Wendy's learning culture. Because unless we can create a culture of learning and exchange and development and risk-taking around this, that people consent to, we won't make rapid progress.
And I think the point is there, for me, is that we have brought ourselves, men and women, we have brought ourselves to this point in our development into our civilization. So, what capacities do we need to develop that will enable us together to go beyond this place into a different place? So we can call all the problems, of which the hashtag #MeToo is clearly one. Gender pay gap is one. Why women are succeeding when men don't in other fields might be another issue to discuss. But these are all aspects of a much larger discussion, it seems to me, of which EBBF is engaged, which is, what are the fundamental things that we can do together that will enable us to safely and without screaming at each other and so forth, whether we're men and women or different nationalities or whatever we are, how can we together progress to the next level of our development, which will benefit all humanity? And who needs to be in that discussion? How do we frame it? Where are the spaces in which we can safely have it? How do we ensure that people's voices are heard, that their issues are there, that we don't say, I have a solution for your problem right now, here's my solution, but leave the space for many voices to come in. And, what is the role of EBBF in enabling that process as well in these small ways? And, does that have something to do with our conference and so forth? And that's not to not deal with the questions that fall out of the bottom for that, for the workplace. There are many. And, we need to have the general questions, and we also need to address the other issues that people have today in their position. And hopefully EBBF is going to be able to also facilitate those discussions at another level that will enable people. I know that one of the people on this discussion had a series of questions about work-life balance, which we haven't even begun to look at, which is true for all people who are doing many things. And so that's perhaps another day. But I guess EBBF needs to be congratulated for at least opening the discussion up, and let's see where it goes from here.
Ralph, Maya, Wendy, you've really whet our appetites for the kind of conversation we're going to enjoy in May for the 28th annual conference of the EBBF. We've been going on for a while. So thank you very much to everybody. We definitely have not covered everything that we wanted to cover. That's why we all should meet again in May in Geneva to have 4 days together to make sure we cover much more. Tremendous. Thank you very much, all of you. And I definitely look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks' time with the next one of these online calls, and for sure in May in Geneva for the annual conference. Thank you very much to everybody.
Thanks
Bye
so
for now.
much, James, Anka, and everyone else. Bye-bye.